the shutdown and the debt ceiling deadline. CNN now reports that Senate talks are on hold actually Senate talks are on hold as they wait for the details of the House bill. And now live to the Senate.
Madam President.
The senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to encourage the House of Representatives to consider and pass what they seem to be focused on, a compromised resolution to the crisis before us, which includes no Washington exemption language regarding Obamacare. I strongly support, of course, that language, and I strongly support that discussion and that effort in the House. And I really encourage all of our House colleagues to look hard at that and act on that. In particular, I'd encourage my Louisiana colleagues to do that. Madam President, I've pushed this issue ever since we got back from the August recess. As you know, Madam President, right as we went into that August recess, the Obama administration issued a rule, an illegal rule, in my opinion, without statutory authority, contrary to the Obamacare statute, that gives members of Congress and congressional staff special status, a special exemption or a special subsidy, if you will, not in the law, and one not enjoyed in that way by any other American. And this no Washington exemption language, which I've been an advocate of with many others here in the Senate, with many House colleagues, would end that special elite status. And that's what we need to do. Madam President, I think we need to do it for two crucial reasons. First of all, just on principle, I think it should be the first rule of our democracy that Washington is treated like the rest of America. And what's good for America and what Congress and the administration, what Washington passes on America, it lives with itself, with no special status, no special rules, no special exemption or subsidy. That should be true across the board. It should certainly be true regarding Obamacare. That should be the first rule of American democracy. But Washington doesn't want that, Madam President. It wants to impose these new rules on the rest of America. It doesn't want to live by them itself. Sort of like when you walk into a restaurant and hear that the chef never, ever eats at that restaurant, never, ever has a meal out of that kitchen. Makes you wonder. Well, the same thing is true here on a number of fronts, including Obamacare. So the first point is a pure principle, Madam President. Washington should live under the same rules as it imposes on America across the board, including under Obamacare. And so Washington, Congress, all congressional staff, the President, the Vice President, their political appointees should have to go to the same fallback option under Obamacare as is there for all America, the so-called exchanges. And it should do that with no special rules or special deal or special subsidy or special exemption. It should do that the same way ordinary Americans do, who in many cases, 8 million plus, are forced out of good health care coverage they have now through their employment and forced on to the Obamacare exchanges. The second reason, Madam President, I think this language is so important is a very practical one. Because, Madam President, the sooner we make Washington live by those same Obamacare rules as the rest of America, the quicker Washington will change Obamacare in substantial ways, will fix it, not just for Washington, as it did through the special illegal Obama administration rule on this subject, but for America. We need to align policymakers' personal interest in Washington along with the interests of the American people. And the way you do that is make them live by exactly the same rules, make them walk the walk of those Americans who have to go to the Obamacare exchanges, in many cases against their will, 8 million plus, who were satisfied with the health coverage they had prior to Obamacare and then who realize that under this law, that promise by President Obama, if you like the health care coverage you have now, you can keep it, who realize the hard way that that promise was a lie. So there are two crucial reasons we must pass this language into law. First, the principle. Second, the practicality. First, the principle that Washington should live under the same rules, the same way as America. Second, the practicality that we need to visit upon Washington all of the burdens and challenges that face America under Obamacare, including those 8 million plus Americans going to the exchanges against their will. So again, Madam President, I encourage the House to include this no Washington exemption language in any compromise they put together with regard to these issues, fiscal issues we're dealing with now. I think that would be enormously important. I think it would show leadership. I think it will resonate with the American people. The American people get this issue, and they resent, rightly so, Washington getting a special exemption or a special subsidy under Obamacare that no other American in that situation gets. So again, Madam President, I urge the House to act on that important language. That would show leadership. That would align our personal interests with the folks we represent. That would honor what should be the first principle of American democracy. Washington lives under the same rules as the rest of America, on Obamacare, on everything else. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Senators returning from their weekly party lunches to hear more debate on the government shutdown. While we wait for more comment, Senate talks on their bipartisan plan to end the shutdown are on hold. That's according to CNN as they await the new House plan just announced this morning. Also up on Capitol Hill, we are awaiting remarks from Senate leaders who are just returning from their party lunches, likely to talk about the government shutdown and the Senate's plans now on hold. Also the House plan, which is being crafted and is expected to be voted on sometime this afternoon in the House.
I got those from my desk. Why can't you squeeze something over the window? Ruin it for the rest of us. Now I got to start squeezing more.
Oh, what are you doing down there?
We can take a look. We should get that in a second.
going to be delayed.
Guys, we're just delayed for a little bit. Hang tight. And then it says, the column reader is talking on the floor right now.
It's usually a good sign. They're going to wait to see how the House proceeds.
Things are actually happening.
We'll see what happens.
Well, or some kind of action. But there's
It's not happening.
Not happening?
We're trying to get audio.
Everyone plug into the vault or something.
Thank you, Madam President. We still remain hopeful as the hours unfortunately tick down towards what could happen in this country if we don't pay our debts. It's never happened in American history before. I know that when we woke up this morning and when America woke up, they saw Leader Reid, the Democratic leader, the majority leader, and Leader McConnell coming together in discussion, the Republican leader from Kentucky, Senator McConnell, coming together on a plan, and they are pretty close to agreement. We know that there are still problems in the House of Representatives, and I think that some of you in this body are fans of Abraham Lincoln, and many of us have studied a lot of things Lincoln said and done. Lincoln used to talk about when his staff wanted him to stay in the White House and win the war and free the slaves and preserve the Union, he said, I have to go out and get my public opinion bath. And I think that some of my colleagues in the House could learn something from going out and listening to real people, not just going on talk radio, not just going to their country clubs, but to listen to people talk about their lives and what this government shutdown has meant. It's meant more than 50,000 jobs in my state. People are furloughed. 97% of NASA employees in Cleveland and Sandusky, Ohio, and northern Ohio have been furloughed. We know what it's meant to Battelle Memorial Institute, one of the great research facilities in the country. They run the energy labs. We know what it's meant to people that depend on Meals on Wheels and food stamps and depend on food safety and meat inspections and all the things that government does. And we know long term what this shutdown or a repeated shutdown in the future, and that's why these negotiations are so important that Majority Leader Reid is insisting that, you don't negotiate. Every time somebody says, I'm going to shut the government down, you don't repeal the law for them, because then that's what becomes a matter of course. And if you're a research scientist and you're funded by an NIH grant at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, or you're at Wright State University in a medical researcher, or you're doing aeronautics research at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base or at NASA Glenn, if they see these interruptions, if they're furloughed for 3 weeks in October 2013, and then again sometime next year, and again, people, some of the most talented researchers are going to walk away, and we're going to lose so much of the edge we have in this country. We're still the leading economy in the world. We're the greatest country in the world because, as you know, Madam President, in Wisconsin, because we have built the kind of intellectual and physical infrastructure the world's never seen, whether it's the University of Wisconsin, which is a great university, not quite as great as a slightly larger one in Columbus, but whether it's a great university, whether it's the medical research, whether it's building highways and public transit and aeronautics and all that we do as a nation and we've done together, we can't lose that edge. And these government shutdowns and threats are damaging not just to the economy today, but to our long-term future as a nation. And that's why I'm hopeful, as Senator McConnell and Senator Reid have worked together and come close to an agreement, that the House of Representatives will understand how important this really is to the future of our nation. All we're asking is for Speaker Boehner, once we get this agreement in the Senate, that Speaker Boehner simply go along. Otherwise, it really is a betrayal of our values and our future and us as a great country. Madam President, I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Senators discussing the most recent bipartisan proposal offered by senators to address the government shutdown and the looming debt ceiling deadline. A number of sources now reporting that those talks are on hold for now as senators wait to hear what House members have come up with. House leaders this morning unexpectedly announcing that they're offering a plan. It's a counterproposal to what the Senate is working on. You heard Senator Sherrod Brown addressing that. Politico reporting a deal to raise the debt ceiling and end the government shutdown is still far off. White House Press Secretary Jay Carney said today during today's White House briefing, "We're encouraged by the progress that we've seen in the Senate, but we're far from a deal at this point," Carney said during his daily briefing. His comments came as Minority Leader Mitch McConnell put his talks with Majority Leader Reid on a temporary hold as House Republicans worked on a plan that would resolve the dual crises while pushing for more changes to the ACA than the Senate's proposals. We also had expected to hear from senators returning from their weekly party lunches. It appears that those remarks may be put on hold. We still have a camera up and waiting, and if there are remarks, we'll have those for you. Well, so far it's been a quiet afternoon on the Senate floor as negotiations on that bipartisan proposal being crafted by senators are on hold now as senators wait to hear from House Republicans and what they are including in their last-minute counter proposal. White House spokesman Jay Carney told reporters that a deal to raise the debt ceiling and end the government shutdown is still far off. We will show you the White House briefing during this quorum call.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being here. Before I take your questions, I just wanted to note that earlier today the President was briefed by senior staff on the effects of the lapse in appropriations, the so-called shutdown. And among the items that he was briefed on was the fact that small businesses are feeling the impact of shutdown as key federal efforts that support small business have been halted. Due to the shutdown, as you know now in its 15th day, the SBA cannot approve new guarantees of loans provided by banks to small businesses. In a typical month, the Small Business Administration approves loans to more than 4,000 small businesses, and halting these loans represents over $1 billion in lost loan assistance to small businesses, thereby jeopardizing thousands of jobs. And you know, again, another consequence of a wholly unnecessary, completely manufactured crisis that is doing harm to our economy, harm to our small businesses, and was brought about by, you know, one faction of one party in one house, in one branch of government, making ideological demands and thereby shutting down the government. With that, I take your questions. Julie.
Thanks, Jay. I wanted to just get a sense of the state of play at this point. Is this the White House's understanding that there is a deal in the Senate that's been finalized between Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell that would lift the debt ceiling and reopen the government?
The President is pleased with the progress that we've seen in the Senate. It is important to note that the process that's been undertaken in the Senate is bipartisan, that Senators Reid and McConnell have been engaging one another. Democrats and Republicans have been engaging on this issue, and it's all built around the fundamental premise that we should not have shut down the government, that we should reopen the government, and that we must ensure that the United States pays its bills on time, as it always had. And we should do, that Congress should take those actions in a way that does not have partisan strings attached, and that ensures the kind of stability for our economy and for our middle class that they need. So we're pleased with the progress. I would refer you to Senate leaders for the status of those discussions. But we certainly believe that there's a potential there for a resolution to this unnecessary manufactured crisis that can allow us to get back to the important business of helping grow the economy and create jobs and taking action to improve the lives of middle-class Americans that elected officials were sent here to do.
Is the White House confident that that resolution could pass both the Senate and the House ahead of the Thursday deadline for the debt ceiling?
For congressional timing and how...
you guys know the state of play.
There's no question that we are very close to a very important deadline, and time is of the essence. So I think that is why you see some very serious-minded efforts being undertaken in the Senate, and we would hope that the House would also approach this important deadline with the same understanding of just how serious it is.
And in 2011, the U.S. credit rating was downgraded just because the government got so close to a default. Is the White House or Treasury hearing from any of the rating agencies now that we are, again, very close to that deadline without a resolution?
I would refer you to the Treasury Department for those kinds of conversations. If they're taking place, that wouldn't be something I would brief on from here. We know from past experience the difficult lessons learned from 2011 that the serious flirtation with default that House Republicans engaged in 2 years ago led to some pretty negative consequences for our economy, including, as you noted, the United States being downgraded for the first time. So,
the President, in these briefings that you say he's getting every day, is he getting anything from any of these officials about how the rating agencies?
you know, that would not be something that I would brief on from here, because the obviously issues that have to do with market sensitivities are not ones that I would address here. Roberta.
Last week, the President said in a worst-case scenario, there are things that will do. And what if Thursday comes and there's no deal? Has the White House started implementing any of those contingency plans already ahead of, because we're so close?
Well, I would not go further than what the President or the Treasury Secretary have said about that, and I would refer you to Treasury. The Treasury Secretary, Jack Lew, testified, as you know, last week, where broadly this issue was discussed. But we are obviously focused on working with members of Congress, leaders in Congress, on an effort to do what we said was essential all along, which was open the government and make sure that the United States pays its bills by extending the debt ceiling, and doing that in a way that we don't simply put us on a trajectory to recreate this crisis again in a few weeks. So we're encouraged by the progress that we've seen in the Senate, but we're far from a deal at this point, and so we hope that progress continues.
What is there about the Senate deal, though, that doesn't recreate the crisis in a few months down the road? What is there in it that doesn't mean we're going to be doing this all again in the year?
There's not a bill for me to analyze for you right now. What I would
the shape of the pending.
Look, I think that every participant in this exercise would hopefully understand that it should not be repeated. Not in a few weeks and not in a few months, and when it comes to the fundamental responsibility of Congress to ensure that the United States does not default, not ever. That's certainly the President's view. That is why he has been so insistent that we cannot engage in a process here that then becomes normalized, where a minority in Congress, a faction of one party in one house, can threaten the full faith and credit of the United States if it does not get what it could not get through the normal legislative process or through elections. So, those are the stakes when it comes to the essential responsibility of Congress to ensure that the Department of Treasury can pay our bills.
There do seem to be, though, some strings attached in the deal as it appears to be sort of coalescing or developing. What does the White House make of those strings?
Again, I'm not going to analyze details of a bill that we haven't seen yet and that has not emerged yet. Brianna.
Jay, it seems like the key parts, at least, of the Senate bill, the reinsurance, the income verification. President Obama said, quote, "Nobody gets to threaten the full faith and credit of the United States just to extract political concessions." But if you're open to that, as presumably the White House is, because they're talking to Senate Democrats, isn't that concessions?
Again, I think what we have seen in the process thus far that Senator Reid has engaged in is a proposal that would reopen the government and remove the threat of a first-ever U.S. default by raising the debt ceiling. We don't need any more self-inflicted wounds from Congress. The economy is already paying a price, as outside analysts have noted. There is already a cost to the economy and therefore to growth and jobs from this behavior. And it's important, as I think so many Americans believe, that it stop, that Congress simply fulfill its basic responsibilities to open the government, to fund it at, again, levels that were set by Republicans, so that we can get about the business of negotiating in good faith over longer-term budget proposals. I'm not going to...
But there are provisions on... you are talking about the short-term increase in the debt ceiling and the CR. If you're not going to talk about the Obamacare provisions, which are always which are also on the table, I mean, you're talking about the short-term debt ceiling and CR provisions. I mean, even if these are sort of small fry gives on Obamacare, doesn't it violate the principle that the President set out there that he will not negotiate on Obamacare?
Again, until we have a proposal that has emerged from these negotiations in the Senate. I'm not going to, analyze it with you piece by piece. What I can say is we've been encouraged by the progress, and we believe, and the President believes, it's very important that when it comes to the debt ceiling that we not do what a previous effort in the House would have done, which was try to create a scenario where budget negotiations and the renewal of government funding are once again tied directly to the essential responsibility of Congress to pay our bills, and right before the holidays, which would be a terrible outcome to this process, as every business owner will tell you, and I think many of them have told you, and many of them have told their representatives in Congress.
So does he hold firm to that assertion that he will not negotiate when it comes to Obamacare on the full faith and credit of the U.S. or on the government being shut down?
Yes, he has made clear that he's made clear two things, Brianna, as you know. He is willing, within the context of broader budget negotiations, within the context of serious-minded and earnest discussions about how to improve the Affordable Care Act, to look at any proposal that might do that, going to Obamacare. And that's true on broader budget issues. But with some of the ideas that we've seen this morning, when it comes to sort of demanding ransom to try to rally Tea Party members in exchange for opening the government or raising the debt ceiling, that's not acceptable, and it has not been through this whole process.
Speaker Boehner, real quickly, is there nothing in the Boehner proposal that's acceptable to you?
Reopening the government and extending the debt ceiling, that's acceptable.
The Obamacare provisions included in the Senate deal?
Again, I think two things. One, as I understand it, there's not a proposal in the House to talk about now, based on the press conference given by House Republican leaders, and based on some of the reporting I've seen since then. That's because they're now going back to try to add some sweeteners for Tea Party members. And the better course of action is the one being undertaken by Democrats and Republicans in the Senate. Instead of trying to, once again, craft a measure to ensure full Republican support in the House, why not work on a measure that could get bipartisan support in the House, the way that Republicans and Democrats are trying to do in the Senate? That's certainly what I think is best for the American people. It's what it's the kind of process that the President supports. So with regards to proposals that we haven't seen, it's hard to...
But aren't you cherry-picking which parts you'll talk about? Because you're talking about the short-term funding and debt ceiling increase, but you won't talk about the other items.
Talking about the shutdown and the need to raise the debt ceiling, yeah, that's what we've been talking about for weeks. No, we've said all along that we want a debt ceiling increase for as long as possible because of the need to remove uncertainty from this process. I mean, the very uncertainty that has been created by this manufactured crisis is what we need to avoid as an economy going forward, and what Washington needs to avoid, because it is already causing harm to the economy. It is already causing uncertainty among Americans, which in turn has them making decisions about how they spend their money, which has a negative impact potentially on the economy. And that creates a cascading effect that can only be bad, which is why we need to, here in Washington, why Congress needs to fulfill its basic responsibilities, reopen the government, and make sure that the full faith and credit of the United States is upheld, as it has been in the past. John.
Hey, Jay, what exactly is the deadline
for
raising the debt ceiling for default?
Well, those are two different things, as we've been explicitly clear about. On October 17th, as the Treasury Secretary has noted many times, the United States runs out of borrowing authority. And beyond that point, we only have cash on hand available to pay our bills. The Treasury Secretary has testified to this on Capitol Hill and is obviously far more an expert than I, so I would point you to his testimony and public statements about that fact. But as everyone knows, in order to meet all of our obligations as a country, the United States needs borrowing authority in order to make sure that all of our bills are paid. All of the obligations that Congress has made, all of the bills that Congress has incurred, will come due. And if we can only pay those bills with cash on hand, that is a problem, and that is what...
I was trying, everybody has their countdown clocks, everything going on. They seem to be counting down to midnight tomorrow. But is it midnight tomorrow when the calendar strikes the 17th?
I'd refer you to... as much as I'd like to improve the quality of the countdown clocks, I would have to refer you to Treasury on the minute and the hour.
Countdown clocks need to act by. Do they need to pass something by tomorrow? Can something pass on Thursday? Will the sky fall if it doesn't pass on Friday? When is the deadline that they have got to produce something?
Well,
is it tomorrow?
John, the deadline for avoiding uncertainty has passed. The deadline for not shutting the government down has long since passed. So Congress has already failed to act in a timely fashion.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, the call of the quorum be vacated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, what is the pending status on the Senate floor?
The Senate is on the motion to proceed to S-1569.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise then to speak for approximately 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we're 33 hours away from the possible default of the United States of America on its debt obligations. We are 33 hours away from the possibility of the United States of America becoming a deadbeat nation, not paying its bills to its own people and other creditors. We are 33 hours away from our T-bills becoming a junk bond. Mr. President, it is unacceptable that our T-bills, our Treasury bills, should move to a junk bond status. We got to get rid of that, and we've got to get rid of the junk talk that's going on around here. The Congress of the United States must have a sense of urgency and come together on a program that ensures that the United States of America pays its bills and open its government to serve its own people and to serve the role that we play around the world. I say to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, let's pass the framework that was originally suggested yesterday by the leadership of Senator Reid, our Democratic leader, and by Senator McConnell, our Republican leader. It's not maybe something we all would have written, but it is something that we could all do. It means that we could, when the President would sign it, the government would reopen, we could extend the debt ceiling, and we could be working on both our budget and our Senate appropriations. And I say, as the chair of the Appropriations Committee, I am eager to go to work. I am eager to fashion that bipartisan compromise, both within the Senate in terms of what our spending should be, how it could be, make sure it's affordable, that it's frugal, that it's good investments in the American framework to make sure we have our national security, physical infrastructure, meet compelling human need, and do research and development. That's not, we can do it. And I've talked with my House counterparts. We are eager to go to work. But in order to negotiate, we must have this agreement. I am really adamant that before we can get to appropriations and our budget, we have to raise the debt ceiling. If we fail or falter to address this crisis, the United States of America will irrevocably be affected. And, Mr. President, this is a manufactured crisis. It is a manufactured crisis because it's a self-inflicted crisis. This is not what our global competitors are doing to us. This isn't what Russia is doing to us. This is not what China is doing to us. This is what the House of Representatives is doing to us. I thought we had an agreement here, arrived at by two mature leaders willing to be statesmanship, rather than brinkmanship. That became the mantra of the day, statesmanship over gamemanship. We all felt pretty good about it last night when we went home. It was going to take give. Certainly was going to take give from we appropriators, but that was okay. That's the American way. Now we're on the verge of being a deadbeat nation. How humiliating is this, that the federal government, already shut down for 2 weeks, could be heading for a default? The full faith and credit of the United States has always been the international standard for investment in the world, and now it's a question mark. There's a lot of confusion about debt ceiling and what it means. Debt ceiling doesn't mean permission to acquire new spending. It means to acquire funds to pay bills that we've acquired in the past. The debt ceiling determines how much the government can borrow to pay for the programs it has already enacted. Let me repeat that it allows the United States to pay the bills that it has already incurred. Now, opponents of raising the debt ceiling say that by blocking an increase, it's going to save the United States money. Mr. President, it's simply not true. You don't save money by not paying your bills. You know what happens when you don't pay your bills? You get a lousy credit rating. You know what happens when you get a lousy credit rating? You have to pay more for what you want to buy. If you have a terrible credit it's like we're moving into payday loans here. This is the United States of America. You don't just erase the debt by not paying your bills. In fact, you end up owing more money, as I said, because your interest rates go up. The consequences of a default are significant and severe. For the House of Representatives to say no and just want to say no to what we were working on in the Senate is the height of dangerous behavior. The Treasury Department warns that default could create a worse economic crisis than 2008 and could cause more damage that might last over more than a generation. A generation's 20 years. I don't want children that are now 6 and 7 and 8 years old to end up growing up in a country that's viewed as an international deadbait. I don't want to derail our economic recovery. Economists predict we could lose over 600,000 jobs. 401ks would be hit hard. Now, the president also would have to decide who gets limited government money. We will operate only over existing limited government revenue. Should we pay our troops, continue Social Security checks? What should we do? Mr. President, this isn't only about let's squeeze government programs. This is going to put the squeeze on Medicare and Social Security. I lived through this in the 1995 government shutdown. The consequences are really severe to Social Security. Each month, Social Security pays about $70 billion in benefits to 63 Americans. Most payments are made to retirees and people with disability. October 16th, that's tomorrow, we have a bill due of $13 billion. On October 23rd, the next round of Social Security checks go out. That's $13 billion. November 1st, another $27 billion. Another $4 billion in SSI benefits. If we have default, we might have to delay benefits. They could be delayed until there's enough revenue in the Treasury to cover the payments due that day. Let me paint the picture. Within the next 4 weeks, we have $70 billion worth of benefits due in Social Security. Jack Lew, the Secretary of the Treasury, says that on October 17th, he's going to have $30 billion. Well, just in Social Security alone, you got a $40 billion decline and a gap. The Bipartisan Policy Center estimates that not raising the debt ceiling could delay the November 1st payment by 2 weeks. We're talking about delaying Social Security. Mr. President, that's an earned benefit. That's an earned benefit. Let me tell you what it also means to Medicare. On Medicare, if the government fails to pay, if we have the Medicare payments would be delayed. Now, what does Medicare pay? It pays providers and also covers the prescription drug benefit. Let's go to the prescription drug benefit. Gee, it's meant a lot to a lot of people. If you need prescription drugs, like to control your blood pressure, to control your blood sugar, whether you need to take an anticoagulant to avoid a heart attack or a stroke, you need your medication. About $5.2 billion worth of Medicare payments to private insurance companies for the drug coverage is due November 1st. On November 1st, the United States government is supposed to pay its share to private insurance companies to cover the prescription drug benefit. If it doesn't do that, what's a private insurance company going to do? They're supposed to help administer this Medicare Part D benefit. Will the insurance companies continue to provide prescription drugs if they don't get paid by us? What happens to the seniors? I don't know. Let's go to providers. Medicare pays doctors and hospitals who treat Medicare patients. Under the law, they're supposed to be paid within 14 days. Every day, 5 million claims are paid to either hospitals or doctors worth about $1 billion. Now, if we don't have money to pay that hospital or to repay that doctor for services rendered, will they continue to treat Medicare patients? Will hospitals continue to admit them? I'm sure they would do it in an emergency, but the whole idea of being able to see your doctor is to avoid an emergency. Doctors are already hesitant about Medicare because of the Spartan reimbursement. But now we're talking about maybe no reimbursement at all for weeks at a time. And why? Not because of a natural disaster, but because of politics. Politics, politics, politics. Now, particularly the other side of the dome, the House, might not like Obamacare. There are those on the other side of the aisle here don't like Obamacare. But I think everybody likes Medicare. No matter what you think about Obamacare, and I do believe Obama does care, that's a good thing to call that health care program, but I do believe that everyone likes Medicare, and I know no senator, no member of the House of Representatives who would like to end the Medicare program. But if we default, we could be ending Medicare as we know it. We will shake the very confidence in the provider system. We will shake the very confidence that we have in a partnership between Medicare and private insurance and the people who need health care. What is it that we're doing? And again, this is a self-inflicted manufactured crisis. I say to the House of Representatives, listen to the framework of the Senate bill. Let's not add a lot of other issues that you might like to bring up. Let's pass the framework that was discussed by Senators Reid and McConnell yesterday. Lots of give and take, that we would reopen government, that by December 15th, the Budget Committee will have met, that by January 15th, we would have produced our spending bill for 2014, and we would lift the debt ceiling until February 7th. I think that would be a good way to go. Now, one might say, well, shouldn't the Budget Committee meet anyway? You betcha. Senator Murray passed her budget bill on May 23rd, by almost 70 votes here in the United States Senate. But she could not go negotiate with Paul Ryan because 6 senators on the other side of the aisle objected. So now we have to pass legislation mandating following the law. We're now passing a law to tell them to follow the law. So if we have to pass a law to tell them to follow the law, I'm willing to do that. Because in order for me as the chair of the committee, working with my vice chairman, Senator Shelby, a really rock-ribbed fiscal conservative, we have a lot of negotiating back and forth, but we have an atmosphere of civility, candor, and an interest in the good of the country. We can get it done. And we know we've got to give and take. And I know, as a Democrat, I have to, and I'm willing to do it. I called him this morning and just reaffirmed my commitment to work in a spirit of compromise. So let's get on with it. 33 hours to go. Now it's 32 hours and 45 minutes to go. The clock is ticking. The clock is ticking on the United States of America, and it's standing in the world. Mr. President, I really urge that we come together, that the Senate is able to move the framework that was discussed by our leadership, that the House take it up, that we pass it, and we get on to doing the governance that we were elected to do. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Speeches continuing in the Senate this afternoon on the new House proposal addressing the government shutdown. It's their counter to the bipartisanly crafted Senate plan that appeared to have all the steam at the beginning of the day today. Talks on the Senate proposal now on hold as we are seeing tweets from sources indicating trouble with the House Republican plan. Billy House, journalist on Capitol Hill, reports that Congressman Charlie Dent saying that it doesn't appear right now that Speaker Boehner has the votes to pass the GOP plan that was unveiled today. Also, Jill Lawrence tweets, and this is breaking, that the medical device delay is now out of the House's bill, per 2 sources who are close to the talks. We will certainly keep an eye on this and pass on the latest to you as it becomes available to us. In the meantime, we await further debate on the Senate floor on the government shutdown and the debt ceiling talks. This is live coverage on C-SPAN 2. Waiting further remarks from senators on the debt ceiling deadline, now about 32 hours away. Also, House Democrats are meeting with President Obama this afternoon. If there are comments afterwards, we'll do our best to bring those comments to you. Also, we're just learning that despite indications that the votes may not be there for the House proposal to end the shutdown to pass, the Rules Committee is meeting this afternoon to talk about rules for debating the measure, expected to be brought to the floor today, and that is from Jake Sherman of Politico. While we wait for more from the Senate floor here, we spoke earlier today with a Capitol Hill reporter with the latest on the debt ceiling talks.
On day 15 of this government shutdown, and just a few days before the nation reaches its credit limit, there are competing versions in the House and Senate between Democrats and Republicans. Let's begin with the Senate version, which would reopen the government through January 15th. It would also allow the Treasury to borrow into February, and under the Affordable Care Act, there would be an income verification. It would also set up further budget negotiations. That's the Senate plan. The new House version, unveiled earlier today, would repeal a new tax on medical devices. It would take away federal health care subsidies for lawmakers. It would also fund the government, like the Senate plan, through January 15th and give the Treasury the ability to borrow normally through February the 17th. This headline from Politico.com, the White House saying that the Republican plan demands a ransom. And joining us on the phone is Dan Berman. He is White House editor for Politico. Thanks very much for being with us.
It's great to be here.
First, walk through what we can expect from the President this afternoon. We know that he is scheduled to meet with the Democratic leaders shortly after 3 o'clock Eastern Time.
Right. He's going to meet with the leaders on the House side, Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Jim Clyburn, and others. He's expected to make a statement at the beginning of that. The White House, as you mentioned, put out a statement saying, kind of blasting the House plan that was unveiled this morning, saying that again it is another attempt by House Republicans to demand the ransom in order to appease Tea Party Republicans who forced the government shutdown in the first place, and basically endorsed the tacit endorsement of the Senate plan, the plan that's being negotiated between Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell, saying that there's only a couple of days left until the U.S. exhausts its borrowing authority, and it's time for the House to follow suit and pass the bill. President Obama is also doing interviews with some local TV stations, including stations in New York and Los Angeles. Those will be aired later this afternoon and evening. He's expected once again, in those, talk about the effects that the shutdown is having on the economy, on federal employees, and also mention the debt ceiling and the potential effects, the dramatic effects that this would have if we go over the fiscal cliff.
Dan Berman, we were carrying Senator Harry Reid on C-SPAN 2 earlier today, and 2 points that he made with regard to the Republican plan. He said that Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans were, quote, blindsided by this House version. He also added that he was, quote, disappointed in Speaker Boehner. How did this all come about?